We're going to jail, directly to jail, and we're not passing go. Shrewsbury Prison, where the last inmate was banged up in 2013, 220 years after the first jail on the site was built. Given ongoing concerns over the state of our prison system, you might find it odd that you can now do time in some of Britain's Victorian prisons at your own pleasure, not just Her Majesty's. Former jails like the one in Shrewsbury host a range of activities, from educational heritage tours to stag and hen do's. You can even pay to try and escape. It's what's been called dark tourism, more of which in a moment. But plenty of our prisons are still prisons, and the number of people locked up in them in England and Wales now stands at 84,000, the highest in Western Europe and nearly double what it was 25 years ago. It's remarkable now to think that until the Prison Act of 1877, the biggest part of Britain's prison system was a ragbag of locally run jails. For Making History, Izzy Lawrence has done some time to find out what brought about this change.
So, I want you to picture where we are. We are on A Wing in Shrewsbury Prison. If you've ever watched an episode of Porridge, Norman Stanley Fletcher, you were there. This is where we are. It is a cold, cold building. It's May, it's quite warm outside, and in here it's freezing. And I'm here with the historian of prisons, Professor Alison Brown from Edge Hill University. And how were prisons organised prior to the 1870s?
Prisons were broadly organised in two strands: the convict prison system, which held the more serious offenders, and the local prison system, which was larger, more diverse, held most of the prison population.
So what was Shrewsbury Prison?
Shrewsbury's a middle-sized prison.
Okay, it seemed big.
It's holding between about 120 and 160 offenders for much of the Victorian period.
So what happens to Shrewsbury Prison in the 1870s?
The Conservatives come in 1874, and they have made promises about saving ratepayers' money. So the control, the management, the financing of Shrewsbury Prison in the 1870s and largely in 1878 passes from the local magistrates to national government.
Look, we're standing outside a cell. It seems daft not to go in. So let's go into cell 39.
Fletcher?
Good afternoon, sir.
Normally I would hesitate about putting a sprog in here, Fletcher.
Oh, gonna have a bit of company down below, am I?
In the past, you've not always been the healthiest of influences on first offenders.
Whatever you think, Mr. Mackay.
So you'll keep an eye on him, eh?
Difficult to ignore him in a room this size, wouldn't it?
My name's Keith Wilcoxon. I've been a prison officer here, or I was a prison officer here for 25 years before this place closed.
So we've got this cell, at the moment it's empty, apart from a sink and a loo and a pinboard. So what was in here before the prison closed?
In 1988, on a couple of the landings, sadly there weren't toilets and sinks. There were 3 men to a cell in here.
Wow, 3 men.
3 men to a cell. We were one of the most overcrowded prisons in Britain.
If in the 1980s they didn't have plumbing, what was it like in the 1870s?
You must remember that in the 1870s there were no electricity, so there were no lights in the cells. So once the doors were locked, especially in winter time, this place was like the Black Hole of Calcutta. It was a one-man, one cell, and they had nothing. They weren't allowed to communicate with the people in the next cells to them because it was solitary confinement. Solitary confinement and hard labour.
Former prison officer Keith Wilcoxon, who's now employed to give paying customers a prison experience in Shrewsbury. It's part of a growing industry called dark tourism, as Tom Holland found out from Dr. Philip Stone, Executive Director for the Institute of Dark Tourism Research at the University of Central Lancashire in Preston.
Dark tourism is simply an academic brand, really, to highlight difficult heritage in our society, where places of pain and shame or heritage that hurts has had a real profound impact upon really us as a society.
So in terms of historical sites, that would include things like Auschwitz.
Auschwitz is often the one that comes to mind because it does attract over 1 million people a year now.
And why do you think it is? Is it a pilgrimage site, or is it something to tick off a bucket list?
Well, you know, there's questions why people do visit. Pilgrimage is one certainly an important factor, kind of a secular pilgrimage for many people. But, you know, the obvious point is that budget airlines now flying to Krakow, so it's part of the mainstream tourist offering down in that part of the world.
You talked about secular pilgrimage. Is there a sense then in which this is a kind of heir of the Catholic pilgrimages that we'd be familiar with from Chaucer and his pilgrims going to see the relics of Thomas Becket at Canterbury?
I think there's an element of that. Spirituality in tourism is well documented, but it's about finding a sense of meaning.
But I suppose there are also sites that make play with death and pain and suffering that are kind of overtly entertainment. I'm thinking of the London Dungeon, perhaps, or I suppose the mummy of them all, Madame Tussauds.
The London Dungeon, for example, is a classic example of a lighter kind of dark tourism, which in itself in 1977 started off as a kind of a serious museum looking at torture in incarceration. And it's evolved into this kind of, macabre, edutainment kind of place, which uses death as its attraction.
And I suppose it draws its inspiration from the fact that actually executions were public, that they in turn were a source of entertainment.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons public executions in the past became less public is simply because they didn't have the carrying capacity or crowd control facilities to manage the crowd. So that is one of the principal reasons they went behind the castle or the jail walls.
Dr. Philip Stone with Tom, and we'll be looking at the increasing interest in pilgrimage later in the series. Jane, I'm left feeling pretty uncomfortable by the idea of framing Auschwitz or even a prison as a visitor attraction. Should we be worried about the whole idea of dark tourism?
Well, I think that actually it's very important that we commemorate these sites and that we open them up to visitors. I think it's hugely important that something like Auschwitz remains in the public consciousness and we continue to remember what happened. And by opening up these places to tourists and visitors, this is one really important way of doing this. So I think we shouldn't be too worried about dark tourism, but I think we need to be careful about how we do it. I think it's very important if we're representing suffering in the past that we try and avoid doing it in an overtly voyeuristic or exploitative manner. And I think we've got a duty as historians and curators to really try and make sure that happens.
It occurs to me to wonder that perhaps our comfort levels really relate to the passage of time. I'm thinking of the fact that Henry VIII and his 6 wives got me into history in the first place as a child, this gory fascination with divorced, beheaded, died, etc. But now I'm actually writing about the death of Anne Boleyn, for example. It's a moment of horror.
Yes, the spectacle of violence is much less acceptable to us now than it used to be. I mean, we've talked a bit about continuity in dark tourism, but actually the kinds of dark tourism that took place in the late 18th century, say, for example, visits to Bedlam Asylum to view the sort of afflicted there, which was actually seen as quite a sort of major kind of attraction for visitors. I mean, that would obviously be completely unacceptable today. So our idea of what it is acceptable to view has evolved, certainly.
Jane Hamlet from Royal Holloway, University of London, thank you.